Shay said that you can guard everyone in the league except him, so I think it's only fair to ask you if you think you can guard Shay.
100%. Yeah, I mean, Shay is a tough one-on-one player, but I got Shay. There's a lot of time I got Shay, and I'm gonna let him know because that's how we play, that's how we compete. But every time we're on the court, we're just trying to get each other better.
He can guard everybody, can't guard me, but he's gonna be a little. But like I said, a little bit smarter every year, which ultimately makes him a better defender every year. And that's something that, as a team, it's pretty easy for us to follow defensively when we have a guy like that who plays it at such a high level.
When I ask him about guarding you, what's he gonna say?
Shay's a tough cover.
Welcome into the Thunder Basketball Universe presented by COOP Ale Works. We're recording this on April 14th, which means the team has played their final game of the season and they've completed their end of season interviews. And so this is our podcast to wrap all of that up. We were all there at the Thunder Ion during a very, very long day that we call end of season interview day. We all had very different roles. I was in kind of the media scrum, just kind of the press conference room, watching, being able to ask guys questions as they come through. Gallo, you were in a completely different part of the Ion, and Royce, I know you were kind of all over the place. So yeah. Gallo, I'll start with you. Where were you?
Yeah, so we had a little separate side room for some of our internal OKCThunder.com, at OKC Thunder social channels. Our whole digital team can use that opportunity on end of season interviews to gather a little bit something extra and special, that the main press conference room where you're in, those guys are getting peppered with questions that are very broad. They are about the season as a whole and a lot of the different things that are going on. In our room, we were able to kind of laser in and focus a little bit more on some detailed questions that can be used down the line this summer. So you all come to OKCThunder.com. I'll have some feature stories. Paris will be writing too. Royce is going to contribute as well. And so, we will have all sorts of things lined up for you. We know the path has been a big piece of
new one coming very soon.
Royce's role here with us. And so, Royce, you kind of got to see what Paris was doing, what I was doing, and then you were kind of doing your own thing.
Right.
Too.
I was kind of floating around, kind of hanging out with a lot of the players. Yeah. There was a little bit of downtime in between, one player's going, one player's kind of finished up some of their other things around the facility, and so they kind of needed somebody to chill with, and so I was kind of a liaison there. Hung out with a lot of the guys, which was really fun, just kind of be on that side of things, and obviously listening to all the exit interviews either in the room or just on kind of watched it on a laptop too, but definitely kind of a different experience for me personally, just being on that side of things, because normally I'm sitting in that room trapped, can't go anywhere, have to just sit there and wait hour after hour after hour. But I will say, Thunder did a very good job this year in terms of efficiency.
It's so good. Everybody was ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
There's been years where it was not that way, and it was reaching deep into the early evening hours.
Well, Royce, the reason I thought it was so cool that you had the role that you did this year, as opposed to maybe just being in the press conference room like years past, is like I feel like when you're able to be in the mix, when you're able to see these guys in like less guarded circumstances, your powers of perception can really kick in. Like that is your gift, is like being able to glean something from a minute interaction. And so I'm very excited to see kind of like, not necessarily just from that one moment, but the accumulation over the course of the season, in addition to this like final opportunity to see these guys before they ship off for the offseason. I just thought that was
cool 100%.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, honestly, one of the things that like, jumped out at me as I stood there is Trey Mann is like, it just became so obvious. Like this dude is glued to a basketball court.
Yeah.
Like he completed all his stuff. He was done, but he didn't want to leave the court. Like it was like, it's like, hey man, you can go on vacation. You can leave this place, take a break, take a breather. But he was like asking people to play horse. He was every player that came through, he'd be like, Wiggs, come over here, man. I want to play. And like, he like at one point, Lindy was sitting there like waiting to go into his interview. And like Trey is like begging him to get up, and it was almost like Lindy, like like me with my kids.
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
fine.
All right, man.
What are we playing now?
What are we playing?
Muster up the energy.
So what am I, Thanos? I don't know. That's how I feel.
Maybe this is the difference between being like 24 and 20 or 21, however Trey is now.
That's true. But no, that stuck out to me. I thought it was really fun to watch the guys like in that environment.
There were a lot of really fun little moments of the day, and you could tell that it's got that vibe of just kind of like last last day of school. It's a half day, and guys know that on the other side of this is
Yeah.
vacation. So there's a little air of kind of like relaxed to it, and just kind of like, okay, it's the last thing I've got to do, and then I'm out the door. But yeah, one of my favorite moments from the day, Kenrich Williams walked in with a basketball. He just sat down and did the whole interview with Wilson right there next to him, just a souvenir from the season. And then you hear Shai Gilgeous-Alexander walk in, and he's like, good morning.
Oh,
Just in a great mood, ready to rock and roll. And that was just kind of like the vibe of the day.
Shai was on it. Like, I felt like the whole little session between when he was with the main media group and then when he came past me and was chilling with Royce was like, this was Shai's like last stand-up act before he like
Right.
his tour ended. When he left my room, I said, all right, man, well, have a great summer. Like, we'll be seeing you soon. And then I was like, but not too soon. And he goes, yeah, not too soon. Not too soon.
But I will say, one of the things, and this is something I think even Trey Mann talked about, is what a tone it sets that SGA and his kind of personality sets for the group. I think a lot of that kind of joyfulness that a lot of players kind of carry over is that it's just a general vibe throughout the entire facility. And that's kind of what Trey said, is that when your best player's doing that, it really just kind of lifts everybody up and almost kind of makes you accountable to keep your spirits high, keep the positivity up. And I think that SGA, like you said, Paris, he kind of came into the room that way, but he left the room that way. And that's just sort of his vibe in general, is just to be positive and happy.
The other thing about Shai is that attitude doesn't have to always be like the dominant mood of the team at all times. So like one thing that I've been really trying to tap into throughout the course of the year is like Mark's statement that the leader is just the one doing the right thing. And I feel like we see like maybe some of the core guys that are, stepping into those leadership roles. Like there are times when Josh is sort of like thinking the game really elevates the whole team, and you can see other guys thinking the game that way. There are times when Lou's like just nose to the ground competitiveness, like, the path that you did on the Philly game, like that starts to pervade the team. There are times when this sort of like emotional leadership that Darius Bazley provides is like pervading the team, the way that the joy that you're talking about with Shai does. And like, there's a time and a place for all of those things. And it's really cool to see each of the guys coming into their own to like, lift the tide of
it's
everybody.
Character attributes just kind of sprinkled out throughout the team. That's a good point.
One thing
that is true.
That also came up in interseason interviews a lot was how that environment kind of cultivated, especially for a really young team, a lot of empowerment for young guys to step into that role and recognize, okay, I need to hold myself accountable and I can hold my teammates accountable too. Ty Jerome talked about it where he was like, okay, a lot of our comebacks this season and a lot of, the reason why we were so strong defensively was because we knew that if Shai got onto me about something, it was all out of love because Shai wants to be good. Shai's competitive. And so for Ty, it's like, I can get onto somebody else. I can kind of try to hold somebody else accountable and just, kind of get into them a little bit. But everybody knows that it's all out of coming from a good place, because that environment was created where, okay, everybody is here to help each other get better. We're trying to create an environment that helps everybody get better. And so we all know that everybody's coming from a really good place. And also there's just that joy and love for the game that just kind of like permeates throughout the locker room that really kind of helps keep everybody's spirits high.
Yeah. And again, I'm like, while I was saying that, Shai definitely has that joyful attitude, and you can tell it kind of lifts people up. Like you said, Gallo, it's not like everybody feels like forced to be like, well, I have to just take on Shai's personality.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Like I have to be just like Shai.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a really positive thing. It's kind of like what you're saying, Paris, is that, everybody kind of fill those gaps in their own personal ways, whatever their own personal strengths are. And it really just kind of sets up for just solid kind of cross-platform accountability.
Yeah.
Like you said, Nick, whether it's Lou's kind of mindset or whether it's Baze's mindset or whoever it might be, it just kind of sets it up for a little more diversity in terms of how you can hold your teammate accountable.
And, what Ty said is he's not the only player in NBA history to have said, we have such a good relationship, we can hold each other accountable. But I do actually feel like listening to Derek Favors talk about how much fun he had when he was coming into the season, maybe not necessarily expecting to have that much fun. Like some of these other guys, I got to ask you, Royce, like as somebody who's covered the NBA on a national level, you've been to a lot of different other practice facilities and been around other teams. Like what What do you think makes the Thunder's locker room unique? Not maybe necessarily just this year, but this is something that we hear, and it seems like it's a genuine feeling, not something that's like a canned talking point.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think that there's just a commitment to the work, and there's like a commitment to the vision and I think that just starts and kind of in a top-down approach. But I do think that a lot of organizations struggle to align like a front office vision within a coaching staff, within down to a locker room. And you don't get that kind of trickle down effect, that there can be kind of a disconnect of what the ambitions and goals and vision of a front office is, what the coaching staff is necessarily trying to get across. Some coaches are like, well, I need my next contract, or I need my, I don't want my record to suffer. And so you have that kind of disconnect, and then therefore that trickles down onto the court and into the locker room. From what I can see from the Thunder, which has been extremely impressive, is that there is like an incredible alignment, basically top down, and that feeds all the way down to the players, where they understand. I mean, they're walking out on the court, competing hard, playing hard every single night. They are committed to the work, committed to the vision, and so many players talked about in the interviews at the end of the season, is that they've had conversations themselves with top executives in the front office. They Shea even said it, that every time I have one of those conversations, I get more and more excited because they can understand it. And that's one of the reasons that they're so optimistic about the direction of the team, is because they have those conversations and there's just that alignment that exists.
One of the things that I talked about with guys in our room, and our little side room, were, what are keys to being successful as a Thunder player? And the most common answer was buy-in. And that's what we saw all year long.
You don't fit in if you don't buy in.
Right.
I mean, that I think that's kind of throughout the entire organization. But I mean, I think it especially applies to a locker room. Right. But you stick out like a sore thumb if you don't buy in. I think it's pretty obvious.
Absolutely. And that's why we saw so much, alignment with, even though the Thunder had some of the most starting fives this season, most different lineups,
35
different starting lineups this season, there was still so much continuity in terms of style of play, in terms of how guys competed and how they fought back and showed that resilience, just because there's just a level of understanding and buy-in, like you're talking about, from the first person on the bench to the last one.
How about one step further, which is take a look at the shot chart. There's organizational alignment on how efficient this team is going to need to be moving forward to just gain those marginal advantages. And you look at pretty much every player's shot chart outside of maybe one or two guys that can bend that curve, like a Shea, who's just such a killer in the mid-range. But everybody's shot chart is threes and at the rim. And, nobody's like going rogue on the plan. You know?
Right. No, it's a great point. And I think that also just kind of speaks to how I think it was pretty unique for this young group. I mean, this is an extremely young team, but there was an interesting discipline from them throughout the year. And this is, I think, kind of goes into their ability to make comebacks, or just how they competed against, when they were more healthy, competed against some of even the better teams, is that there was just kind of a commitment to that style that I think lasted throughout the entire 48 minutes, where, as in years past with the Thunder, I think sometimes that the teams would kind of just, ebb and flow throughout a game. And I think that is something that is really positive for future Thunder teams, especially as they grow, develop, add more talent, is that when you have that kind of commitment to your efficiency, commitment to discipline, and you can play that way throughout an entire 48 minutes, it's just a math problem. And you end up kind of winning the math problem, because the other team is losing their focus, losing their discipline. They're taking those kind of sloppy mid-range jumpers. They're taking contested hurried threes. And the Thunder are just kind of, steady, slow and steady wins the race type of mentality. And I think that was really, really something that they did throughout basically the entire 82 games.
Making it more of a formula that you can follow throughout the entire 48 minutes. That is a great point. We're going to take a short break here. We're not done. There's plenty more to talk about when it comes to end of season interviews, but we'll be right back right after this break.
COOP Ale Works is the proud sponsor of Thunder Basketball Universe. Brewers of the fan favorites F5 IPA and 99-calorie Ice Chest IPA. You'll find those and many more COOP beers at retailers across Oklahoma. Learn more at CoopAleWorks.com.
Everyone was super duper close. Everyone was super proud of everyone else's success in different parts, whenever they had some. But it was really fun to just go out and compete and get better with everyone every day.
One of the things we were also talking about that was just really cool about end of season interviews was the fact that we got to see everybody, and including guys that we haven't really gotten a chance to talk to in a press conference setting for months, really.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you think Kenrich Williams, who's been out for a bit, Ty Jerome, who had hernia surgery, Derek Favors, who's been out of the rotation for a while. So it was really cool to just catch up with those guys, see them again. And also, even for a guy like Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who played some down the stretch, it was a really good reminder as we sort of wrapped up the season of what that guy and what all of these guys contributed throughout the year. And to remember sort of when this team was whole, when they weren't ridden with injuries at the end of the season, that they were one of the top 11, 10 defensive teams in the league by defensive rating. And they were consistently throughout the year, like making splashes and making teams pay for letting up.
And I think that, one of the things about this group is, again, when they were completely whole, is that there was more depth on the team than I think a lot of people maybe realized. Is that, especially when you kind of compare the Thunder in their young rebuilding phase against some other teams in similar positions, the Thunder have a lot of talent. 1 to 17 now because you've got the two-way players. But there's a lot of good players throughout the entire roster. And I think, like you said, Nick, it was a good reminder of guys that, maybe, I don't want to say you forget about them, but when they're not out there playing night in and night out, you're like, yeah, Kenrich Williams, that guy's a really important player that impacts winning and losing a lot. he makes really important plays throughout every single game. I mean, one of the guys, to me, like Lou Dort, we just haven't seen him play in so long, and you just forget of what positive strides he made throughout the entire year. Obviously, he's a great defensive player, but offensively, his finishing at the rim was better. He shot the ball better. When he was sitting there talking, it just jumped in my head that overtime game against the Mavericks where he scored 15 straight or 12 straight or whatever it was. And just like the really good moments that like Lou had individually this year, you just kind of start to forget those sort of things when you haven't seen a guy out on the court night in and night out in the way that you're used to.
I want to go back to the defense because this was something you sparked my memory with this when you mentioned Lou, Aaron, Kenrich, and then Darius, when that lineup was out on the floor and just kind of like how scary that looked defensively, like what team would want to go up against that lineup, and especially the strides that Darius took on the defensive end this year. That was incredibly, like, so much fun to watch, to see him be just what Mark Dagnall referred to as a factor in the air. He was getting dunks on one end, but then blocking people on the other end. That was really, really fun to watch, and you kind of forget that, that lineup was just really kind of scary.
Well, and the emergence of Shea as more of a two-way player is something that I talked about with him in our room, is just like the importance of him to be a full-on two-way player, a well-rounded player. He made major strides in that department. It's one of the reasons why the Thunder was able to start Josh Giddey, a rookie, and have him have the defense hold up the way that it did. I think when you look at like an overall team defensive rating, sometimes what can be invisible is like the guys just stepping in and like doing their job, and like sometimes it's harder to see what's not happening on the floor. Like Shea wasn't getting blown by the way that maybe he did as a younger player in this league. And so like those things are a little bit invisible, but they're massively important to the overall context.
Well, and the other thing too is that when you kind of put all those things together, guys can naturally settle into the roles that kind of fit their strengths too. Is that when you get a lot of guys out, you kind of have to expand out that role a little bit. Somebody like Poku, who really found kind of a niche in what he was doing post All-Star break. As the injuries kind of piled up, he had to kind of expand out a little bit. Right. And, in some ways that can be good because it challenges you, and there was some room for experimentation and exploration there. But then you can kind of narrow the focus back down where the guys can play to their strengths a lot more specifically. But one other thing that I wanted to point out, and you talked about the defense, I'm trying to remember who said, I think it might've been Josh, was talking about the defensive-minded nature of the group, and pointing out that was also without just a natural rim protector. And it is kind of unusual for a team to be as solid defensively as the Thunder were when you don't have that anchor in the back. Most really good defensive teams have that bailout option. And you talk about guys not getting blown by as much, but even when they did, like some teams, they have that guy back there that's like, well, I can kind of clean this up and cover up your mistakes. The Thunder didn't really have that luxury. And again, when you're talking about building up habits, hopefully at some point there is a guy standing right there. I will say Darius Bazley turned into a pretty nice shot blocker himself, but
he had everybody's back. Yeah,
but at the same time, when you start kind of developing and growing those positions, the habits that you've built up as just a solid structural defense can carry a lot of weight going forward.
That even surprised Mark Daigneault a little bit. Not necessarily that they were able to like protect the rim and block shots the way that they did, but just that the numbers would turn out to be as effective as they were. The Thunder did give up, maybe more threes than they were hoping to, but because they didn't have a true rim protector in that sense, they sold out a lot more on coming over and help side and protecting the paint. And Mark kind of was pleasantly surprised, like that strategy actually worked to our favor a little bit better than I was maybe anticipating.
Right. I mean, you can learn a lot through it, that type of stuff, just in terms of lineups and what can be effective. And, everybody in the NBA is trying to evolve and find the next thing that nobody else has figured out quite yet. And offenses are doing that constantly. And if you can try to stay it's almost impossible to stay ahead of the curve in the NBA, but if you can at least be running alongside it, and you're kind of whatever the trends may be, if you are adaptable to that trend without saying, okay, well, we got to redo the roster now over a 2-year stretch because we got to catch up to the current trend. If you have a elastic roster that can kind of bend to those trends, because we see it with a lot of different teams. If you're playing the Golden State Warriors one night, or you're playing the Cleveland Cavaliers the next night, you're seeing a giant team and you're seeing a small ball team. And so that is the kind of elasticity that you're going to face in the NBA throughout a lot of the year.
But when you have an elastic player, like you brought up Dort earlier, it was great to see him, first of all, without the sling on his shoulder. And it's a reminder of what Mark Daigneault told us, which is every single one of those injured players is going to be able to get at least part of their summer in. And that's a really good thing heading into next year's training camp. And so, when you have a player like Dort, when you have these guys like Bazley who are emerging, you can be more flexible and adaptable. So when this year's draft comes around or free agency comes around, you're not, as you're saying, having to make these wholesale decisions on like, how are we going to do this? It's like, okay, well, we can shift these guys, or they can play different positions.
You're not sitting there saying, well, must have rim protector, and it's like, we really like this and that, but like, we have to have that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Absolutely. And Coach Daigneault said that the biggest ingredient to all of it was competitiveness. And that was something that ran rampant throughout the entire Thunder locker room. I want to throw a question out here, and this wasn't in the rundown, so I'm curious to hear your answers, but we saw so many developmental strides this season for individual players. I'm curious which one has been your favorite to track.
Good question.
And I have one that sticks out on my head. I'll go first so you guys can marinate a little bit. Mine was seeing Trey Mann go from at the very start of the season in training camp. I remember being at the old Ion and we hear that, Trey Mann, he's great. He's still trying to get used to NBA length. He's passing up shots because he doesn't know if he can get them off, to him scoring 25 or more points in 4 out of like his last 10 games or something like that. Seeing that and how his confidence kept building and how he was able to adapt and learn, take advantage of every resource that the Thunder threw his way. He spent time with the OKC Blue, utilized that time there, and came back and made the most of it in real NBA minutes. So seeing kind of that trajectory for Trey Mann, that was so much fun for me.
You know what's funny is, so I asked each of the players what their favorite personal play of the season was, or favorite in-game moment. And for something that we're going to do for our at OKC Thunder social channels down the line, like a third of the guys, maybe half of the guys, instead of picking their own moment, said that Trey Mann flurry against Boston in the second quarter. I was good. I'm asking you about your favorite play, your favorite moment. You're telling me about Trey's. So I mean, I think that your point is well taken, Paris. Like, though that was a galvanizing thing for the whole team to see a guy like that make those types of strides.
I will never forget when we had Trey on the podcast and we asked him about it, and even he was just like, I couldn't believe, that was so tough.
But I mean, that's one of the things that, and Mark talked about this too, of just, I think that they were pretty transparent that when early on in the season, Trey struggled on the defensive end, and it wasn't that toughness was necessarily an issue for him, but it was kind of just like implementing that physicality into a game for a young player that is undersized, that hasn't grown up in terms of his strength yet. And so, he made such big strides on the defensive end throughout the year of just learning how to compete. Yeah. Which I think was really important for him.
And that allowed him to stay on the floor.
Exactly. And because the offensive skill is there. I mean, you can see it. That's why the Thunder wanted him. That's why they selected him where they did, is because he has incredible offensive ability, lethal step back, crossover, He gets to the rim, got the great floater, all those sorts of things that he has. Like you said, Paris, part of it was kind of bringing that out of him and just kind of like understanding that he can do those things on an NBA court, which I think, if you track his season back and look at his time with the Blue, where there was kind of an elevation for Trey after he went to the Blue. And to me, it just seemed like he understood confidence-wise. It just brought that out of him, saying like, okay, I can do this stuff. I can play that way at that level.
Royce, to your point, like the Thunder does, one of its best attributes is seeing people and players for what they can be and not what they are. And I think as we're continuing to see younger and younger players come to the Thunder, one thing that is still sort of baffling to me, but incredible is, Trey told me in my room, he'd never hit that many threes in a row ever in any game at any level. And I think sometimes we expect these NBA players to come in and they've already like accomplished so much, or that they've been these like the best player on their team at every single level. They've just like absolutely dominated. They've scored 50 in games, whatever. A lot of times that's not actually the case.
Yeah.
And they're still emerging. They're still coming into their own. Trey Mann hadn't dunked
I was about
one
to say that.
time in college. And here he is like throwing monster hammers. The NBA game, and this is part of like the Thunder's incredible evaluation and talent like acquisition process, is like they're recognizing that maybe some of these players actually have been hamstrung at the high school level or at the AAU level or in the college level. But we get them into an NBA setting and environment. We get the floor spaced better. And all of a sudden, Trey Mann is a very different player than the one that maybe talent evaluators were looking at the University of Florida and projecting with this like, late first round pick. The Thunder looks at him and sees, okay, what can this guy be as opposed to what he is right now?
A great example of that is Lindy Waters too.
Yes.
Lindy Waters, 4 years at Oklahoma State, very good college player, but not like a standout guy that you're saying, oh yeah, that's NBA skill right there. That guy is destined for the league. And then, he plays, in the basketball league in Enid. Doesn't even really dominate that either. He's just a good player out there. I think he averaged something like 12, 13 points. Then for the Blue, he's not even starting for the Blue. And then when he played, he hit almost 50% from three, but it wasn't like Lindy Waters was the guy.
Right.
And like you're looking out for him. But basically they recognized and understood this guy has a very solid skill. That skill translates to the NBA, and we think we can bring out the best of him. And Lindy Waters looks like an NBA player suddenly.
Right.
Whereas if you would have asked anybody, is that guy an NBA player a year and a half ago? They would have said, no, of course not. But the Thunder were able to identify his skill set. It's one of the things I'm accidentally promoting, but that's our next Path episode is on Lindy. But one of the things
Keep an eye out for
Grant
that.
Gibbs told me, the Blues head coach, is that basically they looked at a guy like him and they said, what's your fastball and how fast can we get it?
Yeah.
And I think that they do that with a lot of different players. It is where the Thunder are really good at this, is that they can identify what that fastball is. A lot of places don't even know what the fastball is.
Right.
And then once you start to, like Lou Dort's another good example of that, is his fastball he's one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. And they took that fastball and they got it really, really fast, but they didn't sacrifice the velocity on that as they built out some other areas in his game as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like the baseball analogy. There are some players, there's maybe like 25 players in the NBA that have like 4 pitches.
Right.
And they are elite 4 pitches.
Yep.
Most NBA players though, especially the ones that are sort of like rotation guys on the back, they've got one really, really, really good pitch. And it's about developing that one skill to an extreme degree. And this is a great segue for answering your question.
Okay.
I know I haven't even answered.
I know.
Sorry.
My guy is Lou Dort, because, and we're going to take the baseball analogy, he had that fastball, but he's got a second pitch now, and it's his ability to be an actual offensive threat that teams have to worry about in a few core areas. He's got a curveball now. He shot over 42% from 3 in the corners this year. His finishing at the rim elevated to much higher levels than the year before.
Yep.
He recognized that from last season, that was like kind of an Achilles heel, that if he's going to get into the lane and attack closeouts and be that tertiary playmaker, he's got to be able to finish through contact. He's got to be able to finish up above guys that are taller than him. We have to remember he's about 6'3". He's probably the shortest guy on the team, actually.
Yeah.
It feels like he's bigger than that all the time.
Of course. But being able to turn himself into just a rounded offensive player that is not a guy that's ignored in the corner. He's not a guy that, how many times did he get fouled on 3-point shots this year? I remember thinking this, like, basically 16 months before, people were like leaving him wide open in Game 7 of a of a playoff series against Houston, and they were basically playing the opposite of a box and one.
Right.
And now he's got guys like crashing into him because they're worried about a 3-point shot. I think that is an incredible evolution that we've seen. And as you project out into the future of the team, to have a lockdown defender that can be your 4th or 5th option on the offensive end, and one that's actually a threat is incredible.
Yeah. And like just kind of within that, Nick, one of the big developments Lou made was off the dribble shooting that, he was always a decent catch and shoot player. He was at least progressing that way. We saw that last season where Lou would have games where he would shoot it pretty well. But we saw him as a guy that was in isolation, being able to take, a 3 off the dribble and make it. And again, that's just that personal evolution in his offensive game, which that's it. Lou had huge strides this year. One that I was going to go with is Darius. I thought Darius's season was so interesting with the way that it started. He got off to a pretty slow start. I think he was really kind of having some issues trying to find his role within the team. Something Mark has talked about with him is kind of that self-discovery element of letting a player that's got so much physical talent like Darius kind of understand and come to his own conclusions of where can I impact a game the most, and realizing it, because that's sometimes one of the best ways to help a player in their developmental track is for them to understand it by recognizing it themselves. But one of the things Darius even talked about just in his is the coming off the bench thing is that like he didn't see that as a demotion, but it was more of like an opportunity to see something from a different perspective.
Right.
Which I think, that's one of the areas that I think Darius has improved a lot in is just maturity. I think he's just got a perspective on the game now. He's one of the longest tenured Thunder players, which is kind of incredible.
At 21 years old.
Right. Right. But he's got so much more room to grow in so many different areas, but he took on a leadership role. You've talked about it, Nick. I think he kind of took on kind of the enforcer mentality for the group. He had that great play in New York with Mitchell Robinson, where he wouldn't let go of the ball, but he was blocking shots at the rim. He was kind of the embodiment of the moment of truth. And then, I think he just also found some confidence on the offensive end. Just he shot the ball better over the last few months, but that wasn't his game. I think that Darius found a comfort level in, I'm not going to obsess over what the box score says at the end of the game. And if people want to evaluate me based on the fact that I scored 7 points and had 4 rebounds, but if you didn't watch the game and you didn't understand how I switched and I guarded 6 different players and how I protected the rim and how I did all this, then that's fine. And I think Darius just found a comfort and understanding that like, I know what I'm doing that helps the team, and I'm not going to let a box score define my success.
He told me I found a style of play that works for me. And I just thought that was really, it taps into this whole thing that these players are searching desperately to find the way that they can attack players are such creatures of habit. They need to go into every single game with like the same routine. That also goes down to like how they're playing on the court too. And these guys who are desperately trying to carve out an NBA career, to get a second contract, to put themselves on a path to maybe a 3rd contract in the NBA, they're desperately searching for what's the style of play that's going to be able to keep me in this league for 8 to 10 years. And for Darius, he's felt like, okay, that search might be over now.
Right.
That like I have found this, and this is what I can like really focus on, and I don't have to worry about anything else.
Right. It's not like he's sitting there going like, okay, am I a 3 that can score 22 points a game? Is that what I need to be to make it in the league? I think Darius has really discovered that like, if I pour myself into this area, some of those other areas will take care of themselves. And I think also, defense travels in the NBA. It's one of the things that is most adaptable on any roster that you're on, whatever your teammates look like. If you can play defense, especially if you can guard basically 5 positions, which is what Darius is able to do. Again, I've talked about it before, but that Utah game was so striking to me where one possession, Darius's defensive assignment is Donovan Mitchell. And he's out on the perimeter guarding Donovan Mitchell. Literally the next possession, he's down on the block and he's one-on-one on Rudy Gobert. And I think he blocked a shot on that possession because he did block him in that game. And there's just not a lot of guys in the league that can go from one side to the other quite that way. And I think that Baze is really has an understanding of that. And I think that is also what he was able to realize that that's the thing that boosted the offensive side, is pouring himself into the defensive side, elevated the offense.
Sorry, go ahead.
I will also say with Darius, as he stepped into this kind of rim protector, kind of force at the rim kind of role, he wasn't undisciplined about it. You know, like a lot of young guys can go
wasn't
about it.
fouling
Like,
everybody.
No, he understood that he had this incredible length. He had really long arms, and he understood, okay, if I use them and if I get my hands up, I get my arms up, I jump, I use my athleticism, I can affect shots without fouling. He finished the season with more blocks than fouls, which is a really
incredible
disciplined stat for a 21-year-old who is just stepping into that element of his game.
I was just going to say, you know, all of the Thunder's young players in this kind of like next generation have had kind of the same, they're on the same trajectory in terms of like how the organization has approached their development. The first year, let it all hang out. You think about Poku and Teo getting tons and tons of minutes. And then this year, second year for those guys, a little bit more confined role. Let's see what you can do. Can you be efficient in 12 to 18 minutes a game?
Right.
Darius, Shea, and Lou didn't have that process. They're kind of in they had a different arc. All three of their first years, they were put into this like tiny role on a good team, on a team that went to the playoffs. Then the next year, it was like, all right, here's all this room to operate and grow. And then the third year, it's kind of like for all three of them, it's been very, very
rediscovering
different.
That role again in kind of a new
exactly.
way. Yeah.
And so Darius, you know, has had a very different arc than some of his colleagues that came into the league at 18, 19 years old.
Yep.
So I don't think it's any surprise that it has been a little bit of a circuitous route for him to get to this point. But in the same way that I think that we were seeing Teo emerge a little bit more with an understanding of like, in order to be a good player in this league, I have to play really, really fast. And for Poku to recognize like the areas of the game that he has to impact defensively and then offensively, those guys got a more straightforward, even with COVID and the craziness of that, they got a more straightforward approach of like how the Thunder wants this thing to look in terms of the development process than Darius probably did, just because of like the timing of when he entered the league.
It's a good point.
So really major kudos to Darius for getting to that place despite that.
You know, and as we kind of go through this, Paris, and you asked that question, it just becomes so clear to me, like, look, you can look at the Thunder season, and if you just look at it from the surface level and you see 24 wins and you think, oh, that was just kind of like a whatever season, you know, we know what their objectives were in that year. But if you kind of just extrapolate and kind of and look at what was accomplished within the 82 game season. I mean, we're just sitting here talking about just some individual accomplishments, but just in terms of what we learned about players, what we learned about coaches, what we learned about style of play, what we learned, new things that even the coaches learned about style of play. There was a lot accomplished within this 82 game window for this Thunder team. And it was, and that's what was, and I know a lot of people think that this is just, you know, lip service type of stuff, is that, you know, not obsessing about outcomes, but that is not really what is important right now. There is so much to be learned and to be accomplished outside of outcomes right now. The outcomes will come later. Like I have no worry about that. The results will matter later and they'll be good. But right now, the work that you can do throughout the 82 games of learning about the bones of a top 10 defense. Shea looks like a future all-star. Josh is good. Trey, I mean, the rookies all had their own impacts. Bays developed, Poku developed. You can go through like a laundry list of things that were accomplished, like this checklist that is very impressive that the Thunder got done over 82 games.
And just the process of discovery. I mean, who before the season started had on their bingo card, Trey Mann's best skill was going to be this deadly step back three.
Right.
That Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who didn't take threes in college effectively, is like one of the best pick.
Another
and pop
good
threats
example
on the
of
team.
what you were talking about earlier.
Who had that Josh Giddey's calling card was going to be inbound passes? Like nobody. I mean, we knew he was going to be a good passer, but like who had that Aaron Wiggins was the 55th pick and was.
Be honest, did anybody know who Aaron Wiggins was a year ago?
So this is
and
the
now he
process
looks like an important Thunder player.
Exactly. So for all of these reasons, this is why Coach Dagnall said that this season was a step forward for the Thunder in a lot of different areas, stylistically, individual player development, and environmentally. We are seeing guys step into incredible roles. We're seeing them step into their individual style of play, which is really, really important for such a young team. Have to remember, this was the youngest roster in the NBA this season, and they stepped into some very, very disciplined mentalities, and they had some really incredible individual performances. performance as well. So a lot for us to digest during these end of season interviews, but it was really good to see the guys learn and recount all of the incredible steps forward that these guys had this season, which brings us to the offseason, which is the first real offseason in the NBA
Good point.
in 2 years,
Man.
which is incredible. So this means this is Darius Bazley's first real offseason. This is obviously all the rookies' first real offseason. So this is going to be really, really important for a lot of guys. Coach Dagnall said this is going to be a really big summer. You have to remember, these are young guys, and physically, off seasons and in your young years are generally where you make your biggest strides. So a lot of big things coming for these Thunder young players during this off season. They're all going their separate ways, but we have some news about Summer League, which the Thunder will be participating in 2 summer leagues. They will be in the first weekend of June. They'll be in Salt Lake City, and then in the July 7th through 17th, I believe.
Yeah, so July 5th through 7th, they'll be in Salt Lake City, and then 7th through 17th in Vegas. And kind of in the run up to that, so the guys will get a couple weeks here, kind of riding out the end of April to just do their own thing, decompress, relax. Most of the young players on the team will be back in Oklahoma City intermittently between, beginning of May through the draft and Summer League. And then once we get into August, that's when the guys really get to lay back and completely rest. But it's Royce, I think you were mentioning off camera, there's a really cool cadence that the Thunder has laid out for these guys, not just this specific summer, but over the course of maybe their rookie contracts, how they're able to build some autonomy and some professionalism of their own.
That's something I kind of learned, honestly. I've been around this team in the NBA for a long time, and I didn't really know that was an intentional thing that they were doing to basically, kind of structure early on for some of the younger players, bring them back to Oklahoma City and almost kind of show them how to set up an off-season workout program,
right? And
what you need to focus on, both on and off the court. And there's really kind of an educational element that goes into it for a lot of those younger guys. But, Mark Dagnall pointed out Darius Bazley is kind of getting turned loose, is I think the way that he kind of phrased it, that he's kind of moved past that. And now you let a player like that kind of take ownership over their own individual career track. And I think that is a really interesting thing to do, is that basically it's you train them up, you let them learn some stuff, and then you hope that they can go out in the real world and do it on their own, And I think that is such, like you said, they use the word autonomy. And that when you do take that kind of ownership over your own individual career track, you've got the baseline that you've learned over the first few years, but it also just kind of, builds in that personal accountability that the work matters in the off season. And I just thought that was a really interesting thing. And I didn't really know that was an intentional thing that they did.
And it's not necessarily they've aged out or it's seniority privileges or anything like that. It's just the organization understands that to develop these people as human beings, you can't hold their hand their whole lives, and that you've already shown them the menu of here's what's possible. Here's what might work for you. Now you tailor this to what what you want your summer to look like.
And again, like you said, when you do that, and I think the word that Mark used was ownership, is that you just have that, that personal accountability where it's my career.
Yep.
And, I need to take control of this and apply the things that I've learned before into advancing however long I want to play this game at this level. I've got to do these things. And so when you put that kind of personal accountability on it, I think that really can strengthen a lot of the offseason developments.
So we know what the players will be doing this offseason. Be sure to stay with us on the Thunder Basketball Universe podcast as well, because we'll be bringing you weekly podcasts throughout the offseason as well. Be sure to stay locked on OKCThunder.com and at OKC Thunder on all social channels so you can see all of the great things that Nick Gallo gathered in his room. And of course, you can keep up with the latest from The Path. That's coming out shortly. So be sure to stay locked there. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much to our producer, Matt Bishop. And until next time, Thunder up and catch you later.